Hey everyone, welcome to my Distant Worlds 2 Mechanics series. This is going to be episode 6. This will be covering fleet templates. I've been really excited to do this, and a lot of people have asked me about doing this, but until a few months ago, when it didn't support different hulls, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, it really wasn't worth going over because most of us weren't using it who's played the game. They've since fixed it, and now it supports multiple hulls, and I'm going to do an example of supporting multiple hulls and creating a fleet template. So that's going to be very useful for us in supporting this and using multiple hulls. So before I actually go into fleet templates, I need to talk about multiple hull support. In other words, what it would be like to, why would you do it? How do you do it? Why do you make a fleet to have different cruisers? Why not just have one cruiser, as many of us did in the past? So in order to show you that, let me put up a chart here. Now I'm playing as the Akuro in this playthrough I'm doing for this demo, but human cruisers, doesn't matter what other race you're using. They have, I believe they all have the same tiers here with the same names for the cruisers, okay? So just to be clear, the tier 5 and tier 6 is my currently researched technology. I'm just about to get tier 7, and I'll show you how that will change some of my settings. What I've done is I've created a tier 6 cruiser. I've called the design CA just so it's easy for us to follow. I've created a CA command cruiser. That's a hull called the command cruiser hull. And I upgraded that, got a new weapon or a new shield, so I made it actually version 2. So that's all we're going to be really dealing with is the version 2. The tier 7, I'm going to create 3 new cruisers, and they're going to supersede some of our designs here, depending upon our settings, and that's why I want to talk about this. So here's what we're going to do. Here's why, in a very simplistic case, you could certainly do more than this. One really good example of 2 hull support would be a general cruiser here, which is, loaded with torpedoes, has some shielding, and some basic sensors, maybe my trace scanner, which I like, which gives it a little more damage. But my command cruiser is going to be more on defense. So it's going to have more full shields and full armor. It's going to have a lot more PD weapons. I'm going to tell it to be cautious rather than neutral in its settings when I design it. And I'm going to put in heavier sensors, so like short range sensors. So I'm going to spend a lot more of its limited hull space, right, on this stuff like the fleet targeting, which is going to help all of the ships in the fleet, right? So it's like a kind of a support ship. Now, you could also make like a third type here, which was full of PD weapons, and you put them on the picket setting for the position in the fleet, and maybe they're loaded with PD weapons, so they kind of protect your inner ships. There's a lot of different things you can do with hulls, right? And I'll leave that for another video. But just for this example, we're going to have basically 2 cruisers in my fleet. So I'm going to have a command cruiser, not too many of them, right? Maybe 1 or 2 or 3. And then my regular cruiser will be the bulk of my ships. And I'll have some destroyers and other things too. But I'm going to keep it very small and simple for this example. All right, now that you understand roles, in this case like cruisers, destroyers, and the hull types of 2 of them of which I care about right now, let's go to how to use a fleet template, okay? So you go to military tab over here, you click on fleet templates. You're going to see that the AI has already given you 4 templates, and it tells you the cost and the maintenance, the ship count, and everything else. I'm going to make my own. You could simply click on this, hit edit, and change these, and that's what I typically do when I play, believe it or not. But I'm going to leave them alone for a particular reason. I'm going to add a new one, okay? And so when I add a new one, I have to give it a name. So I'm going to call this sort of like, frontline task force or something, right? So this is my my big fleet maybe. And of course, I'm going to use small numbers here just for this example, but that's what I might call it. And I'm going to add ships here, right? I'll talk about all the other settings after I add my ships. So I'm going to add maybe some destroyers. Okay, and I'll talk about what this is here in a second, but let me just add like, 10 or 5 destroyers. And we'll put some cruisers and some cruisers. Now I'm putting 2 cruisers here because I want to support 2 hull types, right? All right. And I can directly grab that hull. So if you remember my heavy cruiser here, and not my heavy cruiser, my regular cruiser here, okay? And let's put in 5 of those, just for the small example here. And I could put in my command cruiser. There were 2 versions, but I'm using them. It's only going to allow me to pick the latest version of that hull. And I'll put 2, right? So I only need 2 command cruisers. Now in real game, I would probably do a lot more than this. I'd probably have 30 ships, 20 to 30 ships, depending on where I am in game and how much money I have, because the maintenance cost does add up. But for this very small example, I'll just use these 12 ships. Now we're ready to go. Now, there's all kinds of other settings. I will cover these in a minute. These I've covered in other videos. This is orange because I don't have a particular setting here. So if I had made this an automated fleet, that would be a problem. It wouldn't leave the system to go do things. We'll cover that a little bit later too. And I'm going to cover all of these, but right now I'm just going to click this to be manual. And then I'll talk about why I did that and what the other settings mean in a second. All right, I'm done. That's the basic thing. I'm done. I'm going to talk about the settings later, but I basically made a fleet template. I'm going to close it out. Okay. And there it is. By the way, you can sort here by build cost or role or manual, right? So I like my manual at the top, so I'm going to just sort by role and put it there. Okay. Now, what do you do once you have a template? Well, you can do one of two things, right? You can build a new fleet. Okay. You can form a new fleet if you had a bunch of these ships already laying around. I don't. These designs just came out not too long ago. But you could grab, like if you had 100 ships that are not in fleets, you could grab them. I rarely do this. And then the third thing you can do is, let me close this out, is go to an existing fleet. So I have this little first fleet here that only has 2 ships, and I can top it off with ships. But I'd have to first select the fleet template I just designed. So I'm going to select my frontline task force. Okay. And then I could hit this top off with ships, and it will build the ships that are missing from this fleet. I'm going to come back to that in a minute because depending on my settings, it's going to do different things, allegedly anyway. So we'll come back to that. But that's the 2 ways you could do it. You could top off a fleet. And what's nice about this too is in the future, as I make this new fleet, and then I said, I want to change my template. I really don't have enough ships. I can change the template, come back here and just hit top off, and it will add more ships to my existing fleet that I built with the template earlier. Okay, let's go back to templates though. And we're going to make a new fleet. So there it is. That's the custom design one that I made. And I'm going to build a new frontline task force and I normally get a list of construction yards here, but it doesn't always work if a particular construction yard can't build all these ships. There's one reason really, it doesn't have the resources. Okay, basically. And that's what's happening here. I don't have enough. There's no spaceport that has all the resources that these ships need to build it. And so it's just going to say, listen, I'm going to grab it from all my different construction yards, and then the fleet will come together and meet at a certain place, right? But let me just show you. So for example, if I used one of the other ones here that they made, you'll see that raiding force that the AI designed, that fleet template, has no problem. It doesn't have a lot of ships, and it doesn't use a lot of resources that are newer that my empire is just gathering. So I can pick a specific spaceport. That's what I usually try to do in game for any one of my fleet templates here. I want to build it at one spaceport. So I might build the raiding force here. I might build my invasion force here, at a different one. I might build a couple defense forces at 2 other spaceports. And then every spaceport is building my ships, right? I mean, building one type of fleet. Okay. So I might do that. Okay. So I let the game run a little bit just so I'd have some more money to show you how this works. So because I let the game run a little bit, if I click on my frontline task force and I click build new frontline task force I actually do have a spaceport that has enough resources, and a planet as well, that has enough resources to build this particular fleet. Okay. So I'm going to click here and it's going to build. Let's go back just take a quick look, right? It's going to build 12 ships, right? 5 destroyers, 5 cruisers, 2 command cruisers. Okay. So let's go do that and pick the spaceport, and there it is, right? So if I close this, you'll see there's my cruisers, there's my command cruisers, there's my destroyers. Okay. The second thing, as I mentioned, that you can use this for is if you have an existing fleet. Okay. So let's say I made this fleet out of an old template or something, right? I make sure that this is now my frontline task force template. I'm using that template. And then I hit this button called top up fleet with ships. Now, because I already have a destroyer and a cruiser, it's not going to build the same number that the last fleet just built, right? It's going to just top it off. So it's going to only add 4 ships so that I get a complete match to my template, or a near match to my template. We'll talk about that based. All right. So that's the 2 uses. So now I have a brand new fleet based on that template coming out, and I have another fleet here. Now, actually it didn't. See, if you look here, there are 12 ships. This one only has 8. So what happened is, if you look up here, my money, I ran out of money. Okay, so if I'd had enough money when I hit top off, this fleet would have been fully built, but I did run out of money, so it couldn't fully build that. If you don't have any money at all, or not even enough for one ship, and you click it, there's no feedback. It'll just not do anything. Okay, so that's a little frustrating. So now that you know how to create one, you know how to build a new fleet at a particular spaceport, or just in general from everywhere if you have to, and you know how to top off a fleet, let's talk about the additional settings. Okay, so I'm going to go back and edit our original fleet template here. Okay, and let's talk about the settings. Okay, now this fleet role is just a temporary thing. I usually leave it for manual, but for example, you might say, I want 3 defensive fleets, and I'm going to pick where I build them at, right? But I want 3 defensive fleets, and I want them on auto defense. I don't want to think about them. I just want them defending some key spaceports that I have. So if you click on defend here, all right, it will, when it creates this fleet like you saw a few minutes ago, it will create it automatically set on defense, right? Auto setting. So the fleet's going to take care of itself. You don't have to do anything to it, depending upon what this fleet engagement range is. And we'll talk about that in a second, okay? But once you create the fleet, if you go back and you set this manually inside the fleet setting, right? So let me show you that. If you go back here, see this one set to manual. So it would have been on defense if this was the one we just created. If I go and change it to manual, then it's back to manual. So that setting is not anything permanent. It's not really important. In fact, you could go back here. You could put it always on manual. And then when the fleet comes out, you could manually set it to be attack or defense or whatever you wanted. So not super, super important. Okay. This, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't work. I would love to hear some comments if people have gotten it to work. But what it's supposed to do, and maybe by the time you watch this, it'll be fixed. What it's supposed to do is, if you had some old cruisers, so let me put up my chart from before. So you see here, I might have had some light cruisers laying around in one of my fleets. And when I hit top off, right, there's no light cruisers in that fleet, right? So what this should do, at least in my mind, what this should do is it say, oh, you already had 2 light cruisers, so I'm not going to build 12 new ships. I'm going to build 8 new ships, and I'll upgrade your light cruisers to be the cruisers that I'm missing. In other words, maybe 2 regular cruisers here or 2 command cruisers. It doesn't work. I've tried it many times, or it may work and it's not what I'm thinking how it works. But I'm pretty sure that's what it says. When you read this, it's pretty clear. That's what it should be. Regardless, you don't really need it, right? As long as you don't mind when you top off your fleets, you can manually retrofit those ships later, right? There's a million ways to do it, or many other ways to do it. So you don't really need this. So I actually leave it disabled anyway. Trim excess ships. So for example, you might have a fleet that you're about to top off, but it has a carrier. I haven't researched carrier technology yet, but it has a carrier from a derelict ship that you had, right? If you leave this enabled, it will, in theory, and again, I've had struggle getting this to work too, although I've seen it do some things, but in theory, it will strip out that carrier from that fleet and it will get rid of the excess ships. Maybe you had 5 escorts in there and your fleet template doesn't have 5 escorts, so it'll just strip it out of there as well. I also leave this disabled because I don't really care if I have a few extra ships. In fact, many times, like I just described, I might have a carrier or a battle cruiser that I got from my derelict ships, and I want to add the 12 ships from this frontline task force template. So I do. So I leave this disabled and it works fine for me. Finally, auto upgrade obsolete specific designs, and I leave this enabled. So let me explain what this is, right? If this cruiser, or better yet, maybe this command cruiser got upgraded to a version 3, if I don't have this selected, right, this will just stay as version 2. But if I have this selected, it will automatically upgrade these to the latest version. Okay, so that's kind of neat to have enabled. So I do leave that enabled. Okay, now let's talk about the other settings like this here, right? So I'm going to go to my cruiser settings here, and I'm going to talk about each one of these. Okay, latest design for a role. Now this is super, super dangerous, and I'll explain why. If you go back to my chart here, okay, so take a look at my chart. I basically designed these ships in the order of light cruisers, cruisers, and command cruisers. I think earlier I said I didn't, but I did put it in this order, okay? And so if I click latest for roll, it's going to look at this chart and it's going to go, oh, what's the latest one? And it's going to pick my command cruiser because that's the last one that I designed. What's really neat, and some people that may not know this, is these selections of individual hulls here is actually in the order that you last created these designs, okay? There's some weirdness if you delete a design. It's actually a bug. And if you edit a design, which you normally can't do anyway because you have ships of that type. So they're edge cases. I'm not going to go over that. But basically, if you're just creating new designs by using the upgrade button and you have a version 2 or a version 3, that, the AI automatically slaps on the end of your designs. What's going to happen is 90% of the time, 99% of the time, is these are in order. So that's the latest design for the roll. So if I click this, it will use command cruisers, okay, right here, which I already have, so I don't want that, right? So maybe I'll put this one back to CA and this one back to latest for roll. So if I use this, I'm going to get the same effect that I had earlier. But what happens, let me pull the chart back up. What happens if, right, I have a tier 7 researched and either the AI automatically creates fleets because I usually leave it on auto, or I manually create a new heavy cruiser. Then this latest design for roll will be the heavy cruiser. Okay, I'll do that really quick just to show you what happens. So right now, if I do this, it'll be this one at the bottom, this command cruiser 2. But watch what happens if I simply go into ship designer. I create a new design and I'm going to click that, sort of by cruisers. Yeah. So the heavy cruiser, that's a brand new technology at tier 7 that I didn't have before. And I have design set on manual currently for this demo. So I'm going to auto generate this new design and I'm going to name it, CA heavy, just for our purposes. So it's clear that you understand what it is. Okay. So that's a brand new design, right? It's the latest design. So if I hit save and exit, I close this out and I go back to my fleet templates. Okay. And I go back and edit this one. And I go back to here where it says latest design for roll. If I have left this like this, I will no longer get command cruisers. I'll get that new heavy cruiser I just designed. So it might be valuable for you if you just want to have the latest design here, particularly if you don't use different hulls for different reasons like I do, or I did in this demo. If you only, in other words, if I X this out and you only had one cruiser, this would be great. It'll just give you the latest design. Now, if you were to go back, let me put the chart back up again, and design a light cruiser version 3, that's dangerous because that will replace the latest design for roll and you'll have a bunch of weak cruisers where you thought you were going to get heavy cruisers. So this is dangerous, this setting, if you are going to go back to earlier tiers and make new versions of those cruisers. But if you're just going to keep making the latest and greatest, this would work fine. By the way, if I click here now, notice my CA heavy is at the bottom. So that lets you know right away what the latest design for roll will be. It'll always be the bottom one here. Okay, so right now, if I leave it like that, or if I hit this, I'm going to get the same results. Okay, all right. Now, latest design for largest hull for roll. This works identical to that. The only thing this setting does, which is actually better than this previous setting, is it will always use that tier 7, those tier 7 hulls. It'll always use the tier 7 hulls, not the, let me put the chart up again, not the tier 5. So in other words, if you made a new light cruiser version 3, as I mentioned earlier, this would ignore that. And it would only use new versions of these tier 7 designs. So that's like almost exclusively you want to use that over this if you're going to even use that setting at all. Okay, the rest of these are all the same, but they're just for different hulls. The rest of these, and this is what I would use in this case because I want a command cruiser, right? The rest of these, and I'll do that right here, command cruiser. Okay. This will guarantee that only upgrades that I make to my command cruiser hull will be used. So if I put my chart back up and you see I have CA command version 2, if I was to upgrade that and make a CA command version 3, that will start using those cruisers here. It will not, however, right, upgrade to the fleet command cruiser. That's a different hull. It will only stay within this hull. right? So if I call the chart up again, you can see it. It will only use the latest version for this hull command cruiser. It won't go to a tier 7. It would kind of be nice if there was one that said, you know, or if they considered fleet command cruisers to be the same hull or something like that. But it's not. So that's what you've got to use. So that's it. All of these are the same. They're just different hulls. So you've got the latest design for roll, better yet, the latest design for largest hull for roll. And then you can pick a particular hull, which I often do. This is what I use more often than anything else. So right now I'd use that command cruiser, and I would use this for cruiser. So now if I update my 2 current designs, they will get the latest one. So I'm actually going to leave it just like that for now, even though I did it a few seconds ago earlier. Okay, finally, the tactical settings. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I will mention it because I've done this in another video. I will mention a couple of things. If you see orange here, and I'm going to go back and fix this right now, that means you have a bad AI setting if you plan on using auto fleets. If you are like me and you mostly use manual, it doesn't matter. But if you use, because manual will never will never do something outside of the system on their own unless you tell it to. But if you want auto fleets, if remember I said a minute ago, you might want to create 3 defensive auto fleets, right? If you go up here, switch this role to defense, and I create 3 defensive fleets. Right now, even if I change this to say, listen, I want you to leave the system, right? 33% of fuel range is like, you've got a home system to defend, but go anywhere within 33% of your fuel range and defend there also. So neighboring systems that might defend. But because this is orange, it's not going to work. So if you see this and you are using auto fleets, you need to close this out. You need to go to your policy settings. You need to go to military, and you need to go to military tax auto. This should be on. I purposely turned it off for this demo. This should be on 24/7. It does not affect manual fleets, okay? But it will allow your ships, your attack fleets, to go pick their own targets, your defensive fleets to react to other ships outside of a system. In the system, they're fine. They would still work. But without that setting, it won't work. So now if you see, I go back here, I go back to edit my template, you'll see it's no longer orange, right? So I can do 50%, 33%, sector range, which is a little, not clear because you don't know what a sector is, but I usually use 33%, okay? But this is a manual fleet. I know I just changed it here, but I am doing manual fleets. So manual fleets, I usually, because I don't want them going anywhere, even in the system, I usually do same location. Because when I'm attacking, I want them to hang out at this planet that I just invaded, and they go off and do stuff. So I usually pick a location for manual. So for manual, I use same location. But for auto, I definitely would use 33% and make sure that that's setting set. And then the last thing I want to tell you is this. So you don't generally want to switch this off if you're supporting multiple hulls. If you have every ship in your fleet uses missiles, okay, then you could say, listen, override this and put every ship to be cautious because you want them to stand back and shoot missiles from a long range. And they'll kind of kite and keep themselves at maximum range from the enemy if they can, if they're fast enough, which is where your engines come in place. But problem is, normally you have mixed hulls. So you might have some ships that have beam weapons or rail guns. You want them to come in close. And then you've got some ships that have missiles. So you should really control this from your individual ship designs and then leave this as use the ship tactics most of the time. You got a small fleet, it's got 15 destroyers, they all have missiles in them. Yeah, feel free to override this. But generally speaking, you don't want to. All right, so that's all the different settings in here. This is no ships available to form. That's, again, an option I rarely use, but that's if you have a lot of loose ships laying around and you just want to form this fleet based on that. I hope that gave you a broad overview, a quick overview of using fleet templates. They're very powerful, and now that they support multiple hull designs, very, very useful. And we'll cover fleets probably in the next 2 mechanic videos. I've had so much requests for fleets. There's so much about fleets to cover. I hope to, in the next 2, talk about other fleet techniques, tactics, and strategies. So please subscribe and hit like for me, and good hunting.